The gunshot that tore through the midnight air was the first sound Nora Grayson heard before the bleating of panicked sheep scattered across the Wyoming grassland. And she was already running toward the pasture with her rifle before her boots were fully laced. September in Golden, Wyoming meant hungry predators descending from the mountains, and this year had been worse than any she could remember. The ranch she worked on belonged to the Hendersons, an elderly couple who had given her employment and a place to sleep in the bunkhouse when she had nowhere else to go 3 years ago. At 22, she had learned every inch of these 200 acres, knew every animal by sight, and had developed an almost supernatural sense for when danger approached. The moon hung full and bright overhead as she reached the fence line, her breath coming in controlled bursts despite her sprint. 3 sheep lay dead already, their wool matted with blood, and she could see the shapes of 2 wolves circling the remaining flock in the distance. She raised her rifle, steadied her aim against a fence post, and fired. The shot went wide intentionally, meant to scare rather than kill. The wolves were only doing what nature designed them to do, but she could not let them decimate the flock that represented the Hendersons' entire livelihood. The wolves scattered into the darkness, and Nora spent the next hour moving the surviving sheep into a closer pen, one she could watch from the bunkhouse window. Her arms ached from hauling the dead weight of the slaughtered animals to the barn, where she would deal with them come morning. By the time she returned to her small room, false dawn was lightening the eastern sky, and she knew sleep would be pointless. She sat on her narrow bed, still fully dressed, and watched the sheep pen through her window as the sun rose. This was the 4th attack in as many weeks. The Hendersons were talking about selling off the flock entirely, maybe even selling the ranch. At their age, they said, perhaps it was time to move to town, to live with their daughter in Cheyenne. Nora understood, but the thought of losing this place, the only home she had known since her parents died in a wagon accident, made her chest tight with anxiety. She must have dozed off sitting up because the sound of horses approaching startled her awake. Through the window, she saw Mr. Henderson talking to a tall man on horseback, gesturing toward the sheep pen. The stranger wore a dark hat pulled low, and even from a distance, she could see the easy confidence in how he sat his horse. A second horse, this one without a rider, stood beside his mount. Nora splashed water on her face from the basin, ran her fingers through her dark hair to tame it, and headed outside. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of sage and pine from the nearby mountains. As she approached, Mr. Henderson waved her over. "Nora, this here is Lucas Patterson. He is looking for work, and I told him we could use an extra hand, especially with the predator situation." Mr. Henderson's weathered face showed the exhaustion of too many sleepless nights. "He has experience with livestock and says he is good with a rifle." Lucas Patterson dismounted with fluid grace and removed his hat. His eyes were a striking blue-gray, like storm clouds over the mountains, and his face was tanned from years in the sun. Nora guessed he was maybe 25 or 26. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a slightly dangerous appearance that was offset by the gentleness in his expression when he nodded to her. "Madam," he said, his voice a low drawl that suggested he came from further south originally. "I heard in town you have been having trouble with wolves. I spent 2 seasons in Montana helping ranchers with similar problems. I know tracking, and I know how to set up deterrents that do not require killing every predator that wanders close. We lost 3 more last night," Nora said, crossing her arms. She was not sure how she felt about someone else coming in to handle what she considered her responsibility. "I have been doing my best, but they are persistent. "I am sure you have been," Lucas said, and there was no condescension in his tone. "Sometimes it just takes two sets of eyes. Predators are smart. They learn patterns. If you have been watching alone, they have figured out where you cannot be at once." That made sense, though Nora was reluctant to admit it. She looked at Mr. Henderson, who nodded encouragingly. "All right," she said. "When can you start?" "Already have," Lucas said, settling his hat back on his head with a slight smile that transformed his face from severe to something warmer. "Just need to know where to put my gear." Mr. Henderson showed Lucas to the other end of the bunkhouse, a room that had been used for storage since the last hired hand left 2 years ago. Nora returned to her morning chores, feeding the chickens, collecting eggs, checking on the milk cow. She found herself distracted, her gaze drifting toward the bunkhouse more than once as she worked. By midday, Lucas had settled in and found her in the barn, mending a bridle. "Thought we should walk the property line together," he said. "You can show me where the attacks have been happening and we can look for patterns." They spent the afternoon traversing the ranch boundaries. Nora pointed out where she had found dead sheep, where she had seen wolves, where the fence line was weakest. Lucas listened more than he spoke, occasionally crouching to examine tracks or scat, studying the terrain with an analytical eye. His presence was oddly comfortable. He did not try to take over or act as though his experience made him superior. Instead, he asked questions, genuinely interested in her observations. "You have a good eye," he said as they climbed a small rise that overlooked the northern pasture. "You have been reading the signs right. There is a pack of at least 5, maybe 6. They are coming from that direction." He pointed toward a line of cottonwood trees that marked a creek bed. "The alpha is smart, keeps changing which direction they approach from, but they always retreat the same way. That is their den direction." "So what do we do?" Nora asked, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun. "Tonight, we both keep watch. You take the south side, I will take the north. We coordinate with whistles. 3 short blasts means spotted, 1 long means false alarm. We do not shoot unless we have to, just keep them moving, make this place feel unsafe. Eventually, they will find easier hunting." "Eventually might be too long," Nora said. "The Hendersons are talking about giving up." Lucas looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt something shift in the air between them. "Then we make eventually happen faster," he said. "You care about this place." "It is the only home I have," she admitted, not sure why she was telling this stranger something so personal. "When my parents died, I had nothing. The Hendersons gave me work when no one else would hire a girl for ranch work. I owe them everything." "That is not the only reason, though," Lucas said quietly. "You love the work itself. I can see it in how you move around the animals, how you talk about the land. You are not just working here. You belong here." His words struck something deep in her chest, a recognition she had not expected. "Yes," she said simply. They returned to the ranch house as the sun began its descent. Mrs. Henderson had prepared a large supper, insisting both Nora and Lucas eat at the main house rather than fixing their own meals. The old woman was delighted to have more people at her table, and she kept conversation flowing with questions about Lucas's travels and stories from her own youth. Mr. Henderson seemed more relaxed than he had in weeks, occasionally catching Nora's eye with an approving nod. After supper, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Nora and Lucas prepared for the night watch. She had her rifle, a heavy coat against the dropping temperature, and a whistle on a cord around her neck. Lucas had the same, plus a bag of what he called deterrents, things he had mixed himself, scents and noises that would make the area less appealing to predators. "You ever been afraid out here alone?" he asked as they stood in the yard, about to head to their respective positions. Every time, Nora admitted. But being afraid does not change what needs doing. Lucas smiled at that. That is bravery, you know, real bravery, not the absence of fear but doing what is right despite it. Is that from a book? Nora asked, feeling her cheeks warm. My mother used to say it, he said, and something sad flickered across his face. She passed when I was 17, cholera. After that, I just started drifting, working where I could, never staying long. Why not? Nora asked. He was quiet for a moment, looking up at the emerging stars. Guess I felt like if I kept moving, I would not have to face being alone. Sounds foolish now, saying it out loud. It does not sound foolish, Nora said. It sounds lonely. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared wounds, of understanding. Then Lucas cleared his throat and adjusted his hat. We should get into position before full dark. The night was cold and clear. Nora settled into her watching spot near the southern fence line, a small outcropping of rock that gave her a view of the sheep pen and the approaches from 3 directions. She could not see Lucas from here, but knowing he was out there, that she was not alone in this vigil, eased the tension she always carried during these watches. Hours passed. The moon rose higher, casting silver light across the grassland. Nora's eyes grew heavy, but she fought the drowsiness with movement, standing and stretching, walking a small circle, keeping her blood flowing. Around midnight she heard it, the soft sound of something moving through grass. She raised her whistle and gave 3 short blasts. Almost immediately, Lucas's whistle responded with the same signal from the north. The wolves were trying a coordinated attack, split between both directions. Nora raised her rifle and fired a shot into the air. The sound echoed across the valley, and she heard Lucas's rifle answer from the north. Then he was setting off whatever noisemakers he had brought, sharp bangs and pops that sounded like firecrackers. The wolves retreated, but Nora could feel they had not gone far. She stayed alert, scanning the darkness. An hour later they tried again, this time from the east. Again, whistles and warning shots drove them back. It became a pattern through the night, the wolves testing, Nora and Lucas responding, a strange dance under the stars. When dawn finally broke, Nora was exhausted but triumphant. All the sheep were accounted for, alive and well. She met Lucas at the barn, both of them hollow-eyed but grinning. We did it, she said. First night, he cautioned, but he was smiling. They will try again, but you are right. We did good. They fell into a routine over the following days. Working side by side during daylight hours, maintaining the fence, caring for the animals, making repairs that had been neglected. At night, they took turns watching, sometimes together, sometimes splitting up depending on where Lucas thought the wolves might approach. They talked during those long night hours, sharing stories, dreams, fears. Nora learned that Lucas had been raised on a small farm in Texas, that he loved reading poetry though he had little opportunity for it on the trail, that he dreamed of having his own place someday, somewhere he could put down roots. She told him about her childhood, traveling with her parents in a wagon, the accident that took them from her, the years of scraping by before finding the Hendersons. She told him about her fear of being alone, of having nowhere to belong, of losing this place that had become home. You will not lose it, Lucas said one night as they sat together near the sheep pen, a small fire burning between them. The attacks are already less frequent. The wolves are learning this is not easy prey. And when they are gone completely, Nora asked. You will move on, find the next place that needs help. Lucas poked at the fire with a stick, not meeting her eyes. Maybe, he said, or maybe I have found a reason to stay in one place. Nora's heart beat faster, but she did not let herself hope too much. The Hendersons do not need 2 full-time hands. They can barely afford me. I was not thinking about working for the Hendersons, Lucas said, and now he did look at her, his eyes intense in the firelight. I was thinking about finding my own place nearby. There is land for sale, I have saved some money, maybe it is time to stop drifting. Where nearby? Nora asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Depends, Lucas said. He reached across the small space between them and took her hand. His palm was calloused and warm. On whether there is someone who would want me around permanent. Nora looked down at their joined hands, at the way his fingers curled around hers so gently despite their roughness. I think there might be, she said. Lucas moved around the fire to sit beside her, and when he kissed her, it was soft and careful, a question as much as a declaration. Nora answered by leaning into him, her free hand coming up to touch his face, feeling the scrape of his stubble, the warmth of his skin. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. I have not felt like this before, Lucas said, his forehead resting against hers. Like I want to stay, like running would be the worst thing I could do. Then do not run, Nora said. Stay, fight for this with me. I will, he promised. For as long as you will have me. They stayed there until dawn, wrapped in a blanket together, watching the sky change colors. The wolves did not come that night, nor the next. Within 2 weeks, the attacks stopped entirely. Lucas's methods had worked. The sheep were safe, and the Hendersons were so grateful they insisted on giving both Nora and Lucas bonuses from the money saved by not losing any more livestock. You two have given us our peace of mind back, Mrs. Henderson said, pressing coins into their hands despite their protests. And more than that, you have given us hope. Seeing you young people work so hard, care so much, it reminds us what is worth fighting for. Mr. Henderson pulled Lucas aside one afternoon while Nora was in town getting supplies. When she returned, Lucas was standing in the yard with a strange expression on his face, something between shock and joy. What happened? She asked, dismounting from the wagon. Mr. Henderson made me an offer, Lucas said. There is a parcel of land adjacent to this property, about 50 acres. It has been owned by his cousin who moved east. He talked to his cousin by telegraph, and they are willing to sell it to me at a price I can actually afford, with payments over time. Says his cousin would rather see it go to someone who will work it than let it sit empty. Lucas, that is wonderful. Nora exclaimed, throwing her arms around him. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair. There is more, he said. Mr. Henderson said he wants to retire, move to be near his daughter like they have been talking about. He offered to sell this ranch to us, together, you and me. Says you have as much claim to it as anyone, that you have earned it with your loyalty and hard work. We could pay them over time and they would leave most of the livestock as part of the deal. Nora pulled back to look at him, tears streaming down her face. Us, together. Lucas cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. Nora Grayson, I know we have not known each other long, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I love your strength, your dedication, the way you talk to the animals like they are your friends. I love how you face down danger without hesitation and how you care so deeply about this place and these people. I want to build a life here with you. Will you marry me? Yes, Nora said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, absolutely yes. They married 6 weeks later in the small church in Golden, with the Hendersons and half the town in attendance. Nora wore a dress that Mrs. Henderson had worn at her own wedding, altered to fit. Lucas wore a new suit, the first he had owned in years. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. The Hendersons moved to Cheyenne that winter, after the first snow. They left behind a thriving ranch, all the equipment and animals, and detailed instructions for everything from breeding schedules to where the best fishing holes on the property could be found. Lucas and Nora stood in the yard, watching the wagon carry the old couple away, feeling the weight of responsibility and possibility settle on their shoulders. "Scared?" Lucas asked, his arm around her waist. "Terrified," Nora admitted, "but also excited. We can do this, cannot we?" "We already have been," Lucas pointed out. "We just have a different name on the deed now." They worked harder than they ever had that first year. Lucas proved to be as knowledgeable about farming as he was about ranching, and they planted crops on the 50 acres he had purchased, wheat and hay that would provide extra income and feed for the animals. Nora expanded the chicken flock and started breeding the best of the sheep, improving the overall quality of their wool. Together they fixed every weak point in the fence line, repaired the barn roof, and even added a room onto the house for future needs. The wolves returned briefly that next autumn, but now Lucas and Nora had their system down perfectly. They took shifts, set up better perimeter deterrents, and within days had convinced the pack to move on to easier hunting grounds. Their reputation spread, and other ranchers started asking for Lucas's advice on predator management. He began consulting on neighboring properties, earning extra income that they saved carefully. Nora discovered she was pregnant in the spring. She told Lucas one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, the same porch where they had shared their first kiss. He was quiet for a long moment, and she started to worry, but then he turned to her with tears in his eyes. "A baby," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby. Nora, I never thought I would have this. A home, a wife, a family. I thought I would just drift forever." "You found where you belong," Nora said, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "We both did." Their son was born in January during a snowstorm that closed the roads for 3 days. The midwife from town could not reach them, so Lucas delivered the baby himself. Following instructions, Nora gasped out between contractions. When he placed the squalling, red-faced infant in her arms, Nora looked up at her husband's terrified, awed face and laughed. "We did it," she said. "You did it," Lucas corrected, kissing her forehead. "You are the strongest person I have ever known." They named him Thomas after Lucas's father. He had his mother's dark hair and his father's blue-gray eyes. Lucas was a natural father, patient and gentle, getting up for night feedings, walking the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, singing soft lullabies in his Texas drawl. Nora found herself falling in love with her husband all over again, watching him with their son. Life settled into a rhythm. The ranch prospered. They hired a young man from town to help with the heavy work, giving them more time to focus on breeding programs and improving their land. Nora's sheep became known throughout Wyoming for their quality wool, and Lucas's consultation work brought in steady additional income. They paid off the loan to the Hendersons years early, and Mr. Henderson wrote back that he had never doubted them for a moment. Thomas grew into a sturdy, curious boy who loved the animals and followed his parents around the ranch asking endless questions. When he was 3, Nora became pregnant again, and this time the birth was easier, attended by the midwife and without drama. Their daughter had red gold hair that seemed to come from nowhere in either family line and green eyes that danced with mischief from the moment she opened them. They named her Clara. "Our family," Lucas said one night, standing in the doorway of the children's room, watching them sleep. "I never dreamed I could be this happy." "Neither did I," Nora said, leaning against him. "That night I heard the gunshot and ran out to find the wolves attacking. If someone had told me it would lead to all this, I would not have believed them." "I am glad I came looking for work that day," Lucas said. "Best decision I ever made." "Second best," Nora corrected. Best was asking me to marry you." "Fair point," Lucas agreed, turning to kiss her. The years passed in a golden blur. Thomas learned to ride almost before he could walk properly, and showed an early talent for handling the livestock. Clara was fearless, climbing everything she could reach and declaring at age 4 that she was going to be a rancher just like Mama. They added dairy cows to their operation, and Nora's butter and cheese became popular in town. Lucas bought more land when it became available, gradually expanding their holdings. They faced challenges, certainly. A drought one year that forced them to sell off part of the herd. A bad winter that killed half their wheat crop. A barn fire that they barely contained before it spread. But they faced everything together, and each challenge overcome made them stronger, more confident in their ability to weather any storm. When Thomas was 10 and Clara 7, wolves returned to the area in larger numbers than ever before. A hard winter in the mountains had driven them down to lower elevations, and ranchers across the valley were losing livestock. Lucas and Nora implemented their old strategies, but these were bolder wolves, more desperate. They started taking shifts again, just like in the old days, spending long nights keeping watch. One night, Clara begged to come on watch with her mother. Nora was reluctant, but Lucas pointed out that the girl needed to learn, and better to teach her now while they were there to guide her. So Clara bundled up in her warmest coat and followed Nora out to the watching post, carrying her own small whistle. "Why do we not just shoot them?" Clara asked as they settled in to watch. "The wolves, I mean. Wouldn't that be easier?" "Easier, yes," Nora said. "But wolves are part of the land, same as we are. They have a right to hunt, to feed their families. We just have to convince them to do it somewhere else, not with our livestock. If we killed every predator that came close, we would spend our whole lives killing, and what kind of life is that?" "Did Daddy teach you that?" Clara asked. "Actually, I taught him," Nora said with a smile. "Or we learned it together. That is how the best lessons are, I think. Learn together." They spotted wolves that night, shadows moving through the darkness. Nora used her whistle, and Lucas responded from his position. They fired warning shots, set off the noise-makers, and the wolves retreated. Clara was thrilled by the excitement, and Nora saw in her daughter's shining eyes the same love for this life, this land, that she herself felt. The wolf problem eventually subsided, as it always did. Life continued its steady, satisfying rhythm. Thomas at 15 was already talking about going to the agricultural college in Laramie, wanting to learn new techniques to bring back to the ranch. Clara at 12 could outride most grown men and had a gift for training horses that they were beginning to capitalize on, breeding and training mounts to sell. One evening, Nora and Lucas sat on their porch, the same spot where they had shared so many moments over the years. Their hair had threads of gray now, their faces were lined from sun and wind, but their hands still fit together perfectly, fingers intertwining with familiar ease. "You ever regret it?" Nora asked. "Giving up the drifting life, settling down?" "Not for a single second," Lucas said. "Every good thing in my life came from the decision to stay, to stop running. You, the children, this place. I found my purpose here." "I was so scared that day you arrived," Nora admitted. "Scared you would solve the wolf problem and leave, or worse, that you would show me up, make me feel useless. Instead, you became my partner in every sense of the word." "You were never close to useless," Lucas said. "You were the bravest person I had ever met, going out alone night after night to protect those sheep. You did not need me, but I am grateful you wanted me anyway." "Always," Nora said. "I will always want you." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. In the distance, They could hear Thomas calling the cows in for evening milking and Clara singing to the horses in the barn. The sounds of family, of home, of a life well lived. Years continued to accumulate like the rings in a tree, each one marking growth and change. Thomas did go to agricultural college and came back with ideas that revolutionized their operation, implementing crop rotation techniques and breeding programs that doubled their productivity. He married a girl from town, a schoolteacher named Mary, and they built a house on the eastern section of the property. Nora and Lucas became grandparents to 3 boys in quick succession, tow-headed whirlwinds who loved nothing more than spending time with Grandma and Grandpa on the ranch. Clara never married, though she had suitors aplenty. She said she was married to the land, to the horses, and she became known throughout Wyoming as one of the best horse trainers in the state. She built her own small house near the barn and ran the horse operation with fierce dedication and obvious joy. Watching her work with a young colt, patient and firm and full of love, Nora often saw herself as she had been at that age. Lucas and Nora gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations, letting their children take over the heavy work while they focused on the parts they enjoyed most. Lucas still consulted with neighboring ranches on predator management, and his methods had become standard practice throughout the region. Nora maintained her cheese-making operation and her breeding program for the sheep, activities that brought her joy without requiring the physical labor she could no longer sustain. They took to spending evenings on the porch, wrapped in blankets, talking or simply being together in comfortable silence. Sometimes the grandchildren would join them, climbing into their laps to hear stories of the old days, of the wolf attacks, and the first night Grandma and Grandpa kept watch together. "Tell us about when you fell in love," the oldest grandson, James, demanded one evening when he was about 8. Nora and Lucas exchanged glances, sharing a smile. "It was not one moment," Lucas said. "It was 1,000 small ones, watching your grandmother face down danger without flinching, hearing her talk about the animals with such care. Seeing how she worked, never complaining, always doing what needed doing. For me," Nora added, "it was how your grandfather listened, really listened, not just waiting for his turn to talk, how he respected what I knew and taught me what he knew. How he looked at this land and saw home the same way I did." "That is not very exciting," James said, disappointed. "The best love stories rarely are," Lucas said. "They are built on ordinary moments, not grand gestures. On partnership and respect and choosing each other every day, even when it is hard." "Especially when it is hard," Nora added. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Lucas surprised Nora with a trip to Cheyenne. They stayed in a hotel, ate in restaurants, attended a theater performance. It was wonderful and exciting, but both of them were relieved to return home after 3 days, back to the land they loved and the life they had built. "I miss the smell of the hay," Nora said as they pulled up to the house in their wagon, "and the sound of the creek, and the way the light hits the mountains in the morning. I missed our bed," Lucas said, "and our porch, and knowing every inch of ground beneath our feet. We are hopelessly attached to this place," Nora said, laughing. "I would not have it any other way," Lucas replied. The seasons turned, each one precious. They celebrated holidays with their growing family, the house full of noise and laughter and love. They weathered more storms, both literal and figurative. A year of poor markets that tested their finances. An injury when Lucas was thrown from a horse and broke his arm. Nora's bout with pneumonia that terrified everyone until she finally recovered, stubborn as ever. Through it all, they faced everything together, their partnership as strong as ever. One spring, when Nora was 50 and Lucas 53, They decided to take a trip back to the place where Nora's parents were buried. She had not visited since their death, the memories too painful. But now, with Lucas beside her and a lifetime of happiness behind her, she felt ready to make peace with the past. They stood at the simple grave markers, Nora's hand in Lucas's, and she told her parents about her life. About the Hendersons who had given her a chance, about the ranch, about Lucas and the children and grandchildren, about how she had found not just survival but joy, not just shelter but home. "I think they would be proud of you," Lucas said as they walked back to their wagon. "I know I am." "I could not have done any of it without you," Nora said. "You gave me the courage to hope for more than just getting by. You showed me what partnership could be." "We showed each other," Lucas corrected. "That is how it works. That is how it has always worked with us." More years passed and they grew old together with Grace. Their hair turned fully gray, then white. Their steps grew slower, their movements more careful, but their minds stayed sharp and their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, deeper, a bond forged through decades of shared experience and mutual respect. Thomas took over as the primary operator of the ranch, managing it with skill and wisdom. His sons were growing into fine young men who loved the land as much as their forebears. Clara's horse operation was the most successful in the state, with buyers coming from as far as Texas and Montana for her trained mounts. The ranch that Nora and Lucas had saved and built and loved was thriving, ready to pass to the next generation. On a warm summer evening, when Nora was 65 and Lucas 68, they sat on their porch watching another sunset. This ritual had become sacred to them, this time of day when the world seemed to pause and they could simply be together. "You remember that first night?" Nora asked. "When we both kept watch against the wolves?" "Every detail," Lucas said. "How scared I was that I would mess up, that you would not respect me. How determined I was to prove myself worthy of being your partner." "You proved that the moment you treated me as an equal," Nora said. "Most men would have tried to take over, would have acted like I did not know what I was doing. But not you. You listened. You learned. You worked with me, not around me." "It was the smartest thing I ever did," Lucas said. "Along with asking you to marry me and choosing to stay when every instinct told me to keep drifting." "I am glad you stayed," Nora said softly. "I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "You will never have to," Lucas said. "I am not going anywhere. Told you I would guard your heart forever, and I meant it." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn purple, then indigo, then black, stars emerging one by one like diamonds scattered across velvet. The sounds of their family surrounded them. Thomas and Mary putting their youngest to bed in the big house, Clara singing in the barn as she finished evening chores, the grandchildren playing a last game of tag in the yard before being called inside. "We did good," Nora said. "Did we not? With our lives, our choices, our family." "We did better than good," Lucas said. "We did extraordinary, and we did it together, which makes it all the sweeter." Another decade passed, full and rich. They celebrated their 35th anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management, and Clara's reputation as a horse trainer had spread across multiple states. Nora and Lucas, now in their 70s, spent their days doing light work, enjoying small pleasures and loving each other with the deep, abiding affection that comes from a lifetime of partnership. The wolves still came sometimes, drawn by livestock and opportunity. But now Thomas and his sons handled the watching, using the techniques that Lucas and Nora had perfected decades ago. Sometimes, on nights when the younger generation kept watch, Nora and Lucas would sit at their bedroom window, looking out at the dark shapes moving across the land, remembering their own nights of vigilance. "You miss it?" Lucas asked one such night. "Being out there, being the one standing guard." "Sometimes," Nora admitted. "Not the fear or the exhaustion, but the purpose, the clarity of knowing exactly what needed doing and having the strength to do it." "You still have purpose," Lucas said. "In teaching the grandchildren, in running your part of the operation, in being the heart of this family." "As do you," Nora said. "But I know what you mean. There was something special about those early days, was there not? When it was just us against the wilderness, figuring everything out." "The best days of my life," Lucas said, "were the days that led me to you and the days I spent building a life with you. Everything else is just details." When Nora was 76, she fell ill with a fever that would not break. The doctor from town came and went, shaking his head, saying there was little he could do except keep her comfortable. Lucas rarely left her bedside, holding her hand, reading to her, telling her stories of their life together. Their children and grandchildren came to visit, filling the house with love and prayer. But Nora was strong, stubborn as the day Lucas met her. The fever broke on the 5th day, and though she was weak and had lost weight, she recovered slowly but surely. Lucas, who had barely eaten or slept during her illness, cried tears of relief and held her gently, mindful of her fragility. "You scared me," he said. "I thought I was going to lose you." "Not yet," Nora said, her voice raspy but firm. "We still have years ahead of us. I am not done living with you." And she was right. They had several more good years, years of watching great-grandchildren be born, of seeing the ranch expand and modernize while maintaining its essential character, of sitting on their porch and counting their blessings. They moved slower, needed more help, but their minds stayed clear and their love never wavered. Lucas died in his sleep at 82, a peaceful passing with Nora beside him. She woke in the morning to find him gone, his face serene, his hand still holding hers. The grief was a physical thing, a weight on her chest that made breathing difficult. But she did not fall apart. Lucas had taught her too well about strength, about carrying on even when it hurt. She lived 2 more years without him, years where she felt his presence in every corner of the ranch. She would catch herself starting to tell him something, only to remember he was gone. She kept his chair on the porch empty, unable to bear seeing someone else sit there. At night, she would talk to him, telling him about the day, about the family, believing somehow that he could hear her. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her with love, making sure she was never alone for long unless she wanted to be. Clara moved back into the main house to keep her company, and Thomas visited every day. The great-grandchildren would climb into her lap, asking for stories, and she would tell them about their great-grandfather, about how he had come to the ranch looking for work and stayed for love. On a spring morning, just after her 85th birthday, Nora woke feeling different. Lighter somehow, as if the weight of years had lifted. She got up, dressed in her favorite dress, and walked out to the porch where she had spent so many hours with Lucas. The sun was rising over the mountains, painting the sky in golds and pinks, and she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. Clara found her there an hour later, sitting in her rocking chair, her eyes closed, a smile on her face. She had passed as gently as Lucas had, as if she had simply decided it was time to go join him. In her hand, she clutched an old whistle on a cord, the same one she had worn that first night when she and Lucas kept watch together against the wolves. They buried her next to Lucas in a corner of the ranch they had both loved, with a view of the mountains and the creek. The entire valley seemed to turn out for the funeral, testament to the impact Nora and Lucas had made in their community. Thomas spoke about his parents' partnership, how they had shown him what true love looked like, what it meant to work side by side building something meaningful. Clara read a poem Lucas had loved, her voice breaking but staying strong. The great-grandchildren placed wildflowers on the grave, flowers picked from the meadows that Nora had walked for nearly 60 years. In the years that followed, the ranch remained in the family, passed down through the generations. Thomas's oldest son took over operations when Thomas grew too old, and that grandson's children after him. The techniques that Lucas had developed for managing predators became standard practice taught in agricultural schools. The sheep line that Nora had carefully bred won awards across the West. The house that they had expanded and improved became a gathering place for family celebrations and holidays, always full of life and love. But perhaps their greatest legacy was the love story itself, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. The story of a farmhand who protected livestock from predators, and a cowboy who joined her watch and guarded her heart forever. It became a family legend, the foundation story of their dynasty, proof that the best things in life come from courage, partnership, and the willingness to stay and fight for what matters. On summer evenings, if you stood in the yard of that ranch in Golden, Wyoming, you might catch a glimpse of two figures on the porch, holding hands and watching the sunset. The current generation would tell you it was just shadows, tricks of the light. But the older folks, the ones who remembered or had heard the stories, they knew better. They would smile and say it was just Nora and Lucas, still keeping watch together, still protecting what they had built, still very much in love after all these years. The wolves still came sometimes, drawn by the livestock and the promise of easy prey. But they never succeeded. The family that Nora and Lucas had founded knew how to stand guard, how to protect what was theirs without unnecessary violence, how to work together in partnership. These lessons, passed down through generations, remained as relevant and vital as the day they were first learned. And so the ranch continued, a testament to what two people can build when they find each other, when they commit to staying, when they work side by side facing every challenge together. The land prospered, the family grew, and the love story that started it all lived on, as fresh and powerful as the day a lonely drifter rode onto a Wyoming ranch and found the home he had been searching for all along.